On this week's episode of the Steam Deck podcast, we're talking about Valve releasing new hardware in 2026, and the question, is Nvidia finally ready to get into the handheld PC race? What's up, Internet? You're tuning into this week's episode of the Steam Deck podcast, Split Screen Games' weekly gaming podcast all about Valve's portable PC powerhouse, the Steam Deck. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined today, as always, by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. How you doing this week?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, full steam ahead. I'm good.
Yeah, we're missing Max.
Yeah. Usually he says ahoy, ahoy, and that's what triggers that one for me. Also, I gotta be, I'm on my second pot of iced tea today, so I'm vibing. I'm operating on a higher plane of existence today.
In addition to or in replacement of Diet Coke?
Have we had one today? Ooh, I don't know. I don't think I had one today, but if I have, that might explain the hummingbird energy I'm bringing to the show.
The jitters.
A little bit, yeah. It's good. It's good that I realized that I felt that way as soon as we started recording and not beforehand, But it's all right. Yeah. We're here. We're ready to rock.
It's okay. If your heart explodes, at least we've got the camera to capture it. So it's
yeah, make sure you put that up on TikTok. Make it count for something, right? Jesus. So yeah, man, I'm interested in what you got for us today. I know we've got another piece of another breadcrumb in the Deckard question, and we have some more breadcrumbs being dropped by Sadly It's Bradley, who obviously we have sourced so many times on this show is one of the reliable voices in the Steam Deck rumor community. So why don't you introduce what he's got for us today?
Yeah, so also known as Sadly It's Dadley at the moment because he's just had a baby. So
congratulations, Bradley.
But he put out a poll earlier this week and said what will be available in 2026, and the two answers were Valve Deckard or Quest 4. Hint: there's only one correct answer, and then followed up with most of you got it right, and Valve Deckard is currently sitting at 70% results. So it looks like he's teasing the fact that Deckard's going to be available in 2026, if not before that. He said he's not sure exactly when it's coming, but either late 2025 or early 2026. So I wanted to talk about this because we've obviously not seen any more hardware from Valve since the Steam Deck OLED, and they've obviously got stuff that they're working on. We saw the leaked Ibex controller last year that was potentially the Steam Controller 2 that we've been waiting for. And just whether we think this is coming in 2026, whether we think there's potentially something coming sooner than that. Is the Steam Deck OLED enough to kind of tide people over at the moment? The index is kind of really aging, and people are kind of, ready for something new in the VR space. Like, what's your read on it? Do you think this is accurate, 2026?
I mean, I think for the reasons you laid out, it kind of makes sense just if you're trying to play armchair quarterback, right? Like if you're trying to sit here and read the tea leaves and be like, oh, when would it make sense for new hardware? I think you raised some good points there. And I think it's one of those where there's smoke, there's probably some fire, right? Because the timing of it logically seems to make sense, right? If you're following along, we have a rumor from Sadly It's Bradley, who's somebody who has broken news like this before, right? And then we have all of the patents and stuff that we've been following. We know that that they're working on this stuff, and you have to imagine that it has to come to pass at some point, right? So why not 2026, I think, is more my question than whether or not I think it's definitely 2026, because it could be that maybe 2026 is when we get the reveal and maybe hardware is a little further out. I think that's always possible. But I think it's also worth considering that, to your point about the controller, we've had a couple different, potential devices rolling around in the background. And I think the idea that even if all these things aren't necessarily going to be coming out concurrently, that we might be like inching towards an era where it's like there is a Steam Deck 2 and they're like pushing these other companion devices that are, you know, there to deepen your relationship with the Steam ecosystem in the same way that the Steam Deck existed too, right? And I could see that kind of being the narrative around maybe a couple of these devices coming out over the course of whether it's a year, whether it's the next 2 or 3 years, right? That in the same way that your Steam Deck is this great companion to your desktop PC, right? And you can bring your Steam library on the go. Like the next generation of VR would be another kind of, I think, natural thing to be pitching people as, you know, something that can deepen your Steam library.
And it's bring VR on the go as well. Like it's a very similar thing that they've done with the Steam Deck, because the Index is tethered. You have to have a PC. You've got a cable attached to it. The Deckard, from everything we've seen, is very different to that. It's a device that sits on your head in the same way that the Index is, but potentially is thinner, potentially is an all-in-one unit like the Quest is, and allows you to play games on that device. There was talk that maybe it pairs up and does something with the Steam Deck as well. Maybe you can play like mirror Steam Deck games onto that device. We saw the controllers alongside it leaked, the Roy controllers, which look very much like the Quest controllers, as well as that Ibex controller we spoke about. I think it's kind of time that we see something. I'd be surprised if we don't see some kind of hardware from Valve this year. It kind of feels like we're ready for it. People have been asking for a Steam controller 2 for a very long time at this point. I feel like the more SteamOS devices that are out there, the more people are going to want something like that, especially if we start seeing, you know, OEMs putting SteamOS onto different form factors. It doesn't necessarily have to be a handheld. It could be a little mini desktop that we've wanted for so long, a little set-top box that you plug into your TV. Well, at that point, I'm going to want a good companion controller that I can purchase and use with it. And at the moment, there isn't really anything that has the same input methods as the Steam Deck. There's nothing that has those dual trackpads on with all of the controls and the back paddles or anything. The closest kind of thing would be the DualSense controller or something like that. But I don't think that's in any way kind of similar.
No, yeah, I don't think that's really comparable. It's so much more limited in its usage, right? Especially, I mean, let alone the fact that it's just one, right? That's one of, I think, the huge advantages of the trackpads is that, like, because you can use them like even as like 2 sticks if you wanted to, right? Like it has just so many like applications that one trackpad in the center of the controller
it's not the same, is it?
Yeah, you have to like crane your hand to use it in the way that like it's just a natural part of the way you navigate a deck, right?
Those, I mean, and because of the buttons that are lacking on that controller, they're often used as kind of start select buttons, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
You know, they are just like, the right hand side of the touchpad would bring up the map, and the left hand side would bring up, you know, the pause menu.
I use them for like hotkeys sometimes if like the game doesn't have a specific use for them, you know.
Oh, that's an interesting way of doing it. I've never thought to do that.
Like I did that with like my Game Boy Advance emulator. Like I wanted to have like a thing to toggle between like the speed that I was running the game at, so that if I was playing like an RPG, like I could like speed through battles that are like against low level mobs and stuff like that. So I just literally made it that I could just like press down on the left pad or whatever, right? Because it's like I'm not ever pressing that location for any other reason, right? So just like using it for like little things like that too is
I use the kind of left trackpad on my Steam Deck mostly in green light when I'm emulating. I have it down as the Xbox button, because there's no Xbox button on the Steam Deck.
Yeah.
So it's a good way to bring up that menu, because obviously I can't press the Steam button or the quick access menu because those aren't programmable, and I don't want to use any of the back paddles because my finger might slip on them. So it's kind of like I just press the touchpad and I can use it for that. But yeah, I love the touchpads, and it opens up so many different kind of games you can play. Like Age of Empires is just infinitely more playable with touchpads than it is with a controller.
Sure.
Even when they've got the console versions, it just plays better with a mouse. Like that is the RTSs is just the kind of game that you want to play with a mouse, and the Steam Deck lets you do that. I hope we get the controller this year. do we think that's going to happen? Like, if so, when do they announce that? Like, do they have do they do these kind of things at events, or do they just one day put it up on YouTube as a video and there's a page on Steam?
I'm torn because I think if the rumor about the Deckard having some kind of ability to interact with Steam Deck 2 and like enhance that experience, right? Like, I could see it as a thing where maybe you do kind of release, you do kind of like a hardware, like a wave, right? Where it's like, oh, like this is the next generation of Steam hardware, and you do kind of like push the idea that like they have an inherent interaction, right? And like then maybe you don't care about putting them out at the same time because they are such different products and they don't compete with one another. They accentuate one another, right? Like it's kind of like a cool like feedback loop there, right?
Well, I mean, and also the controller's got, infinitely more use cases to it, right? I might pair that just with my PC and use it, when I'm sat on my desk, because I want something that's not an Xbox controller and not a PlayStation controller.
So that's like, I guess my thought is like, does it make sense to put the controller out this year because you could put the controller out at any time, right? And it's like, we could start using it right now and it could work with this, the current deck, and it could work on your PC and whatever.
Well, I'm thinking it's also working with all of the other SteamOS devices, which are seemingly coming out. We've got the Lenovo Legion Go S, which is the first official one, but you can install it on an ROG Ally. You could maybe install this on any kind of device.
But I guess that's the question I'm trying to like wrap my head around, because like the way Valve does things is unconventional, right? I think, and I think you could do it as, one day you just announce this controller and it exists. And then when these newer devices come out, you just talk about the way that they take advantage of this controller that people are already familiar with. Or you could potentially do, like I said, like kind of like a rollout of like, this is the Steam Deck 2 and whatever the actual name of the Deckard is, and the Steam controller 2, or again, the Ibex, whatever, right? I guess that's the VR one, so that's even a different SKU. But you know what I mean? You could announce that alongside that hardware and show off the controller for the first time on your own devices, rather than just being like, here's this controller and we have to explain what it can do in a vacuum. Like, and again, not that that's like a marketing problem, it's just, I do kind of see I can see the argument for doing it all at once as this really big, cool moment. And like, you buy all three of these devices and look at the way that they all interact with one another, and they can take advantage of all these new, developments and functionality that we've baked in. In the same way that like, when you're launching a new piece of hardware, ideally you want a piece of software that shows off like what it can do.
Like Half-Life Alyx, yeah.
Sure, right, exactly, right? And the idea that maybe the way you show off this cool new innovative controller that we've developed is by showing off how it takes advantage of this cool new technology, the hardware that we've developed alongside it. I think that there's something to that. But I think that because, to your point, like there are these other devices that can take advantage of and everything, you could start doing that now and just get a groundswell of like, people are aware of this controller and think
people
it's cool.
Could try that Aperture Science Lab or whatever it was called. The demo, because essentially that would demo the controller anyway, in the same way that it demoed the Steam Deck, because it's got all of the same input methods. The only one it wouldn't have would be a touchscreen, but I don't think that game used the touchscreen anyway. So that's a possible angle they could go. I'd love them to just put the controller out. I feel like people would snap it up.
Yeah.
And like I'd love one. For the docked experience, but maybe they're waiting to kind of improve that experience before they go, right, let's put out this device, because it probably is going to be more of a companion for the deck.
It's so hard to say, because I think like you asked how do they announce something like this, and I think the thing that makes them so interesting is that like, I mean, what do you need an event for when like 100% of your consumer base logs into the program that you sell them games on every day? Right? Like, it's like, what better way is there to market the next piece of hardware than just putting it on the front page of Steam and then letting everybody write about it and talk about it?
The deck's still there. It's got like a little thing in the top left corner at all
Forever. It's
times,
just
like
there.
Steam Deck, your games everywhere, and then it takes you over to the Steam Deck page. You know, like
So it's like, who's to say we don't just eventually get to a world where they make an announcement on the Steam blog and on social media and everything, right? And everybody, just we get an update and it's like Steam Deck 2 or the Deckard or the controller, and those are just a staple on the homepage, just like the Steam Deck is, and they just continue to lean into like, building out that hardware ecosystem that allows you to never leave the Steam ecosystem,
Yeah. I mean, there is the worry that no one would see it, I guess, to them. Like, if you're in the middle of playing games, I guess people are going to see it, but I guess people talk about it anyway, don't they? It's like,
I mean, think about.
I remember how they announced the OLED model. It was that cool room full of TV screen, the OLED, like Steam Decks in the orb that they had, and then they put that up as a video, and then it was like, oh shit.
Yeah, but that's it, right? Like, it wasn't an event. They just made a cool hype video and put it out. And I think that's
it's different because people knew what it was at that point. But I remember the way they announced the first one. They had this whole thing with like PC Magazine, or I think it was IGN, right? And they had them down and they walked them through everything, and they had the interviews with Gabe and the team and showing them like, here's how it works as a PC, and here it is as a handheld, and you can dock it, and you can have split screen.
None of these things we're talking about are new ideas, right? Like it's a follow-up to a console you already understand what it is.
Kind of like the Switch 2, I guess. Like, you don't have to go all out and explain that anymore, because people know that the controller's detached and they can do things and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, think about it, right? Like when the original Switch was revealed, it was, like they had a big long event where they talked about how it worked and who was going to do, like the conversation this time around was definitely a lot shorter because there's a lot less, like, you don't have to sell what the idea is. And granted, like, Deckard might have a lot of new functionality, but at the end of the day, it's a VR headset in a world where we've had VR headsets for 10 years, and like, we get it, right? It's the next one.
Yeah, but I hope this is the next one that's gaming centric, because everyone else seemed to lose their way. And I feel like gaming really is the only application I've seen, aside from maybe some of the like niche medical uses where it's like, a surgeon's looking at a model of the patient's heart before they go into surgery and they can understand it. Cool. That's great. But that's not an everyday application. People aren't putting these things on their face to go to work and sit down at a desk and do general purpose work. But for playing games, I do think there is a compelling use case. There are some games, like something like Half-Life Alyx, that you can only experience in VR, and like having that control with your hands and being able to move around the space. And I think if Valve can pull off the fact that really they are going to be the best, if not really the only mainstream headset that's really honing in and focusing on gaming, because PlayStation's given up. The Quest, they went off and did their Quest Pro and all sorts of weird shit that was PC, like general purpose focused. I feel like people would be interested in it. And if you get the price point right, I think that's really the reason that the Quest 2 was selling so many. It was like, it was $299. I'll buy it and see if I like it, and if not, I'll sell it on, and maybe I've lost 50 quid, but that's not the end of the world kind of thing.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what their strategy is, because it definitely seems like there's less of not that I want to say there's less of a demand, but I just feel like there are less developers that are like focusing on VR because it's such a small market, that I feel like the idea of like, I think they need to have like a Half-Life Alyx type killer app, and I'm sure they will. And I guess it's just a matter of like what else they are looking for the device to achieve from there. And, maybe they have some other developers right in mind that are looking for that next generation of hardware, and they'll have like these cool, not exclusive games, right? But like they will de facto be exclusive because, to your point, there aren't other devices that are as gaming centric. If this is really
powerful enough,
Yeah, that's what I guess I'm saying, is if it is like really some step forward, right? If it is like a real generational leap beyond the Quest 3 and the other devices that we have on the market right now, maybe that's the move, right? And it's like, we're going to make a niche product for a niche audience, but we're going to make the best one, and anybody that cares is going to own ours because it's the best one.
I kind of feel like that's what they did with the Index, and that's my fear with the Deckard, is that they go down that same route. And the Index is a very expensive device. You know, it's £459 just for the headset. Then you add the controllers, and they're £259, and then you have to have base stations with it because it doesn't have inside-out tracking, and that's £139 per base station. They recommend having at least 2, if not 4 of them for room scale.
Yeah.
So you're looking at, over $1,000 just for the headset setup.
I will say, the one friend I had that had one, it was the best VR experience I had was on that device. But yeah,
because you're walking around a room, you can fill in a space.
We literally it was in my dad's old basement, so it was like a big wide room, and we put them in the 4 corners of the room, and we're playing like an arena shooter. And it was like, this is awesome. Like, it really was like, wow, like, I can go and move and duck behind cover. And, like, my buddy was playing, and he was like, he dove at one point and was like, holy shit, I can dive and shoot while I'm diving. And, it's cool, right? But, yeah, it's certainly an expensive thing. But I guess that's, not dissimilar from the approach that, like, Apple's taking, right? Of being like, we're going to sell a really expensive device to the people that want this kind of device, and that's not a lot of people, but we don't need to sell a lot of them because they're expensive.
And it's high value, yeah, exactly.
So yeah, maybe that's the case, and I guess that's the interesting question for me is like, does that strengthen the argument that these things all come out in a short window? Because the other 2 things are definitely more mass market devices. I think there's undeniably a larger group of people that would buy a Steam Deck 2 and a way, way bigger group of people that would buy a controller, right? Because that could be any PC gamer that wants a controller will probably buy that controller if it's a good controller.
I kind of see the controller could potentially drop this year. It's like, hey, here's a limited edition colorway of the Steam Deck OLED. We did white last year. I know, here's orange. And then here's also the matching controller in that exclusive colorway, or you can buy it in black. And they do that, and that's like their November release for the holiday season. And everyone wants to buy the controller, and maybe they release some software alongside that. Like you were saying, maybe there's a game. Maybe they finally fix Steam Link, because we spoke about that on last week's show, and nobody seemingly has a great experience with Steam Link compared to something like Moonlight. So maybe they put some effort in there. Maybe there's an update with the improvements to the doctor experience, or maybe they just put the controller out and it sells anyway because it's a really good controller and that's all they need to do, and it doesn't really matter. But then next year, I mean, I 100% believe, sadly, it's Bradley when he says there's a headset coming in 2026. But that's going to be the time that they're locked in to do it. It's going to be coming in 2026.
Yeah.
And I could see them doing a Steam Deck too, but it seems like it might be redundant at that point with the way that we're going with SteamOS being available on every device. But we'll see, I guess.
I don't know. I mean, it could be the idea that like they created the Steam Deck, and then now that they've created the form factor, like they can move out of the way and let OEMs compete.
Yeah, see, I kind of see, we spoke about it last week, and I voiced it as, it's kind of like the Google Pixel phones. Like Google can put it out and do their own, they'll do what they see is SteamOS, and they can add the new features there first, and then everyone else gets it like 6 months later. You get the new version of Android 6 months down the line.
And that's kind of what I think will happen. I doubt that they'll abandon the Steam Deck as a form factor. I think it's been a pretty successful experiment for them. Particularly when you think about the conversation we've had about how they've used it to like evangelize the Steam ecosystem, right, to like types of players and regions and whatever that have not historically been giving them money, and now they do. So yeah, I have to imagine that they will follow it up at some point. I guess it's just a matter of when they feel like that quote unquote generational leap is time. And I do think you make a good point though, right? That the idea that it could be imminent, right? I mean, we have, Nintendo Switch 2 is about to come out. We have all these other OEMs like the Ally 2 and these other competitors entering the market, like we talked about, like MSI, and I think that the idea that all of those folks are gearing up for their next generation, and that those are all going to be taking advantage of SteamOS, and I think it's just a matter of when they're like ready to unveil what they feel like the next benchmark is, and when they can produce that at a price point that they're comfortable with. And obviously right now,
I think the price is the thing that they've got on their side, right? Because they can make the money up selling the games, whereas no other OEM can do that.
for sure. And
MSI releasing theirs at $1,000. I don't know that Steam or Valve would want to release the next one as the base price is $1,000. Maybe the high end or the mid version is $1,000.
yeah, I think you're right that they probably are going to want to try to maintain like a lower price point because they know they'll make it back. But I mean, obviously we always reference that quote from Gabe about how it was like, quote unquote, painful to get to the original price point. So and maybe it's just maintaining that price point, right? Or something similar, right? And
I think they can, the Steam Deck's the base, not the Steam Deck, the Switch 2 is kind of the base now. If people can accept that device is $500, then I think the Steam Deck 2 can probably be a little bit more than that. It could probably be $600.
Yeah.
But much more than that, I think.
And maybe like $650 for the one with more memory and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, but it's when you get to $999, I'm just like, oof, for a handheld that's probably going to be, obsolete in 3 or 4 years. That's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, I guess the other question there, though, is, we had that topic several weeks ago now where Max was talking about how like the price of PCs has just kind of gone up in general, and that might be a thing that we as kind of like the PC gaming community haven't really fully grappled with yet, that maybe this isn't a temporary shift in price or an artificial because we've seen that before, right? Like, obviously there was that point when like crypto farming was first popping off, and like graphics cards were like insanely expensive, and that eventually evened out and whatever. But like we might be seeing a across the board, just hike for everything, and the idea of like $1,000 for the handheld might be something that.
If it's that, I want to see either it be expandable, so I can change the storage or the RAM or something myself, so it doesn't feel like, oh, this is going to be obsolete in a very short period of time. Because there's a difference between, building a PC and it costs me $1,000, but in a year I can replace the GPU, or I can replace the CPU, or I can, put some extra RAM sticks in there, and it feels I can freshen it up every single year for a smaller cost. Versus this device in 1 or 2 years is potentially obsolete with the rate it's going. You look at someone like RAG, they're releasing a new Ally every single year. They're shaping up to do another one this year. We just had the X last year. MSI's done the exact same thing. We had the A8 earlier this year, and then we had the M8 or whatever it was called 2 weeks ago that they announced.
And there was there was a 7 series before that had 2 entries, right?
So there's like there's a lot of things going on, and for me, paying that much for something, say it was like a PS6, I know that's going to last me probably 7 years. I can spread the cost of that device over a generation. When it's a device that doesn't last me that long, that's where I struggle. And if it's not expandable, not upgradable myself, that's where I struggle. Because I can imagine a PC, if I build it for $1,000, probably going to last me 5 years.
I mean, I guess that's part of my question, though, right? Is like I don't know that doesn't go as far as it used to. And I'm not saying that I think the Steam Deck 2 will cost $1,000 or that we should be comfortable with that or whatever. I'm more making the argument that I think as we get more comfortable with the idea that maybe $1,000 is no longer the benchmark for like building a entry level kind of PC that's going to last you for several years, that maybe that number is now like 1,500, right? Or 2,000. And maybe, like we said, the Steam Deck 2 is closer to like that 600, 650 range. The idea that the other OEMs that are, targeting that like, oh, we're a little bit more powerful than the Steam Deck are going to land around 8 to 9 to 1,000, I think is something that might be more common than not. But we'll see. I mean, that's totally a read based on the temporary state of the cost of computer parts.
Man, it's crazy, absolutely crazy. I think our next topic, Pete, potentially may say, maybe our saving grace.
All right, but before that, a word from our sponsors. This episode was made with support from listeners like you on patreon.com/flipscreengames. If you enjoy our podcast, supporting us on Patreon will help us spend more time making content and get you access to Patreon exclusive perks like early access to ad-free versions of all of our podcasts, and exclusive content like the twice monthly After Dark podcast, where Steve and I will share funny personal stories, play games with each other, and more. And my daily Patreon show, The Daily Checkpoint, where every day I'll spend at least 10 minutes answering your questions or sharing my off-the-cuff thoughts on what I'm playing and what's going on in the video games industry. If you like what we do and want to go above and beyond to show your support, head over to patreon.com/flipscreengames today. And we're back. So tell me about Nvidia's plans to get into the APU game.
Yeah, so an APU, if you aren't familiar, is an accelerated processing unit. It's basically a system on a chip. It's like a CPU with an integrated graphics. It's what powers the Steam Deck. And most laptops, most handheld devices as well. Nvidia is allegedly partnering up with Mediatek, which is a big chip company. This is coming from Taiwan Economic Daily to build a dedicated APU for gaming laptops, with its first integration expected to be exclusive to Dell, going into their Alienware stuff. But this would be the first APU that we've seen from Nvidia. They've done system on a chips, obviously. They power the Switch 2. But this is something that would be an off-the-shelf part that they would be selling to OEMs. So someone like Valve could potentially buy and put it in their devices. According to Taiwan Economic Daily, it's expected late 2025 or early 2026. So potentially imminent. It's going to be a custom ARM-based CPU combined with NVIDIA's Blackwell GPU technology, which I think is the 40 series of chips, not the current generation is the 50 series of chips. Apparently, market rumors suggest that NVIDIA is going to allow their laptops with this new APU to run at just 65 watts, but deliver performance that's comparable to a 120 watt RTX 4070 laptop GPU. So
Wow.
Significantly reducing power consumption. And Taiwan Economic Daily said, if successful, it would represent a major breakthrough for the industry. Just for reference, the Steam Deck runs at 15 watts, so still a way off of that TDP. But potentially this chip could run at a lower TDP, but just be less performant. Or this could be just the first of many chips. And if it's successful for NVIDIA, we could see them just becoming the next Intel or the next AMD.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. I mean, that obviously has very wide-reaching ramifications if they're able to break in and meaningfully really become like a third option. Like that obviously like breaks things wide open. Something that you had here in the notes that I thought was interesting was that there was a comment from NVIDIA's CEO, Jensen Huang, and Dell's CEO, Michael Dell, who was saying they were like talking about AI PCs in 2025 and that this new chip is going to be exclusive to Alienware laptops. And
yeah,
I could definitely see them making an Alienware
handheld. There was
right?
like a Dell handheld PC that they demoed, I think last year. Yeah, last January at CES. It was called the UFO.
Oh man, that's a good idea.
And it had similar detachable controllers like the Lenovo Legion Go. I'll pop the link in the notes, Pete, so you can have a look at it.
Yeah, let me see.
And I'll put the link in the description so people can have a look. And
wow, this looks a lot like the MSI shape. Yeah. It's like got the weird,
but it was a concept. They decided not to build it, and whether that was because they thought Windows was a crappy experience, or they couldn't find, a decent enough chip that they wanted to put in it, and maybe this partnership with NVIDIA is potentially the perfect opportunity for it. That combined with something like, SteamOS maybe, or Microsoft's new like gaming mode that they're allegedly working on.
Man,
There's potentially a lot of good shit going on here.
You think they're kicking themselves that like they unveiled this like 2 years before the Steam Deck? It's like, damn, that was a good idea.
Oh, man, it's like I get it. Like the UFO concept, was what unveiled in 2020, I think.
That's what it's saying here from Windows Central. Yeah, that the it was at CES 2020 was when they showed it off, and then they never did anything with it. And like obviously the Steam Deck was 2 years later, right? So it's like it's kind of funny that
which makes sense because Valve said that they had that idea and that concept, but it was only through the partnership that they had with AMD and building the custom chip that they felt that they could make the device they wanted to make.
Right.
And obviously we've come on leaps and bounds since the original Steam Deck. You just got to look at the latest Z2 chips and you can see that they are significantly more powerful. Something like an ARM-based device, I do think probably is the future. Obviously, there is concern there that means that out of the box, games won't just run how they run now. There will need to be some kind of update to Proton. But we spoke about this last September, Pete. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, we thought it was an Android thing.
Yeah, they were doing a lot of work on bringing it. I speculated maybe they're going to bring it to Apple devices or to Android because obviously Apple Macs are now ARM-based. We've since seen Windows go in on this AI PC bullshit, which is, ARM-based PCs that have this AI edge. Potentially that they could bring, that'll be a way for them to bring Steam to those devices as well. But if they put the work in with Proton, we could potentially see something like, SteamOS, or even if they just let Proton run on Windows, running on these Nvidia devices, which would be exciting.
Yeah, it's definitely very interesting, and I don't know. It's the fact that Valve is like we know is working on something that could solve this problem, right? Like it does make a lot of sense to me that we could see just an official support for this, like, and again, let's say it's an Alienware device, right? Just for the sake of argument, right? If these are going to be exclusive to Alienware computers at launch, and maybe that's just like even if it's a form factor that they're not super committed to moving forward, I could see you making one just as like a marketing tool for these new chips, right? Because it's like you said, like they're entering a market where there are already two kind of established brand names, and there is this like obvious challenge that it presents for PC gaming. If you can be like, hey, like here's the Alienware UFO and it runs SteamOS and it has this compatibility layer, and you can see that it's more performant than, whatever the closest competitor is that they can take a knock at, right? Because probably not the Steam Deck if Valve's the one making the compatibility later. But you know what I mean? Like,
what though? Like they could easily do that because Valve has let Lenovo pop it on the Legion Go S.
True.
And that thing's more performant than the Steam Deck. There's trade-offs, but this,
I guess I'm just saying more like, I mean it in a more like inflammatory way, like negatively comparing the performance of one of the competitors' chips, right? And it's like I'm just saying you probably don't do that to the Steam Deck.
No, yeah.
It's fine if it power-wise blows it out of the water, that's whatever, right?
I feel like power-wise it could. It's an ARM chip, so efficiency-wise it could. It's Nvidia, so we get DLSS and we get all of their juicy tech, like Reflex and all of that stuff.
It's very interesting. Yeah, like I think that could be a really meaningful difference maker, and not necessarily like in a one for one way, but we talked about this, just with the MSI stuff last week, right? That like a lot of these form factors just don't have enough to set them apart from the Steam Deck. And, You know, if you
Well, I mean,
can.
MSI's original edge was it's running on Intel, but that turned out to be a massive flaw because the Intel chip they put in it was shite. So, like, it's kind of like you got to have an edge that's a good edge, and I feel like having Nvidia in your device is a
Yeah.
real differentiator because everyone else is running on AMD. They've all got AMD chips. Even the MSI's shifted over to AMD chips now. So it's like, man, this could be a real coup for Dell.
Yeah, it's especially the fact that it's so around the corner. It definitely, I don't know. It really does kind of make me come around in your line of thinking about Valve maybe doing something as soon as next year. Like if you do have all these other devices that are coming out and are like exciting and
that's what I mean. Like we're going to see the Z3 series of chips being announced.
Yeah.
Later this year.
I don't know. I haven't felt as bullish about it as you, but like this is an interesting wrinkle to the situation that like having another major powerhouse competitor potentially entering the arena is certainly something to think about.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, this is just Nvidia partnering with Mediatek. It doesn't mean that they couldn't then partner with other chip manufacturers and fabricators. That's how they do it with their CPU, with their GPUs, right? They make a reference card, and then MSI can go make one, and Asus can go make one, and all of these other companies just make them. So potentially, that's what this is. They'll follow that same pattern, or maybe they follow the same route that they're doing with the Switch, which is we make these chips and we sell them directly to these OEMs. So potentially it's that route as well. But I'll be interested to see. I think it's really kind of about time that Intel and AMD had some competition in this space. Nvidia has really been going leaps and bounds in the GPU side of things, and I think they could do some good work with these APUs as well.
I'm interested to see what they have for us. I hope it's 2025 and not 2026 because I would love to see at least a tease of some of this stuff.
I could see them doing a tease, just like announcing the chips and being like, "Hey, we are partnering with MediaTek and we're building an APU, and look at this performance of this chip versus an Intel chip versus an AMD chip, and we're like 10 times better." And then that's when they next year say, "Here's the actual devices." And I could see this being announced at CES next year.
We'll just have to wait and see. So if you want to let us know what y'all think about this one, I'm very interested in whether this moves the needle for anybody. Like, are any of you so interested in what NVIDIA could potentially be able to achieve that you might consider a new APU manufacturer? Even though we might need to see this compatibility layer from Valve to make games as playable as we'd like. To your point, I think there is so much potential in that as like a future game changer because of the power efficiency thing, right? Like that's obviously such a big factor in handheld devices that, yeah, I'm interested how folks who are passionate about one of the pre-existing manufacturers feel about the idea of making the jump to something untested. If you thought you would get a power trade-off like that. So, yeah. If you want to let us know, comments down below, flipscreen.games, that's the website. You can get in touch. You can suggest a topic for next week's show, and you can go check out our sister shows, the Nintendo Noise Podcast and the Flip Screen Games Podcast. However you choose to get involved or show your support, thanks for tuning into the show. And a very special thank you to our Patreon producers for the month of June. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valenz, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobe, Project Julian, Steve Stompy, Susan Still Likes Cats and Also Boobies, Voodoo Vic, That One Kid Nick, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/flipscreengames. You all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, go over to the website, flipscreen.games. You'll be able to find all the ways you can get involved or show your support, however you choose to do so. Thanks for hanging out with us. For the crew, I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.